Welcome to the Inquisitive Minds podcast. This podcast is all about searching for answers to questions oftentimes unexplained or unexplored. We want to engage with new and sometimes old theories, psychology, or philosophy from a research based perspective. Hey, I'm Peter, and I'm joined by my good friend John. We're not experts on any of this, but today we're diving into the idea of data collection, attention span, and how that all relates to social media usage. So, if you're new to this podcast, how this podcast works is what we like to do is we like to grab a specific topic, usually something relating to philosophy or psychology, or maybe it's on the cutting edge of science and technology, or maybe it's just something that's really interesting to the both of us. And we like to do a deep dive into it and do separate research and then come together to compare and contrast that research after a period of time and really try to figure out what's going on with the subject. So, John, I wanted to shoot over you. How are you doing? How do you feel about this topic? And I know you had a specific quote in mind to start us off with this one.
Yeah, I'm doing good. And I'm extremely interested to have a discussion about this topic. I think it's a good topic to bring awareness to a lot of things that are very not transparent enough.
Hmm.
So kind of bringing some of the stuff to light might be important to have the consumer have more agency.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so the quote, "What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would reduce to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumble puppy. As Huxley remarked in The Brave New World, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for destructions. And he ends his quote by saying, Orwell feared those that will what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that we will desire what we desire will ruin us. And this quote was from Neil Postman in a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And essentially this quote has is kind of the dystopian view
Hmm.
in the sense there's two systems. The one of Big Brother, the one
Hmm.
that will control us, the censorship, the surveillance, the lack of information, we're all like restricted. And the lesser known of Huxley's view is is being like in the sea of irrelevance. There will be so much information, we'll be overwhelmed in distraction. There's this, it's almost like a overstimulating our a magic trick sort of brain. and and I I'm definitely leaning more towards seeing that today more than this the Big Brother view.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not just only like super negative about technology. I think technology has tons of applications and it is one of the best times to live ever, but I think it's kind of important to realize that it does have some sort of drawbacks to it.
Hmm.
It's like this Faustian bargain, right? You kind of it's the giveth and the taketh.
Hmm.
You give up something important, but you kind of to get something important.
Hmm.
So you're sort of giving up maybe these specific things, like maybe such as lack of social skills affecting maybe possibly our mental health. Uh, the death of communities could be linked to that. We're being manipulated. Um, it could also be negatively affecting the environment a lot. We're experiencing information glut. there's a lot of different possibilities that it could be linked to. But at the same time, there's so many great potential, right? Like you have this best and cheap healthcare. It's making life very convenient, it's easy to live, better communication. Like without technology, we wouldn't be discussing this.
Hmm.
And so like there's that the weight, like the either you could it's either good or bad. Like there's always like a spectrum, right?
Hmm.
So if you sort of know and are aware of the negatives.
Yeah, and going back to that original quote about, you're essentially comparing, if you haven't read the books, Orwell wrote 1984 and Huxley wrote A Brave New World, and there are two different types of dystopias, like you mentioned, and it is interesting for me to kind of be in the Huxley one almost. I mean, it's not really a dystopia. It's not a utopia either, but somewhere in the middle. But essentially, it's like everybody is so preoccupied with doing all these kind of little things that nobody cares about the bigger picture, that nobody really spends the time to learn beyond these little pieces of information that keep getting given, and they're kind of addicted to it. And there's even in the book, there's even a drug called soma, where if any point in time you're kind of outside of this little bubble, this social bubble created, then you're given this drug to like null you, or make you, because when you get outside that social bubble in the book, you get scared, so they give you the drug to calm down essentially. So relating that kind of to our topic, and why I think that quote is like spot on, or getting that pretty close to it, is like, we every day we're going onto our social media, and we're using like our attention, and our attention's being bought up in a kind of economy that we're unaware of almost. So you said we need to be more aware of these things as passive users, because the technology is amazing, but it can also be debilitating to our mental health and to our attention span and to our social health. And I think that's really true. It's like, essentially, every day people are logging onto these social media accounts. They're giving away their data. Most people don't really understand that, and we'll dive into that more. But you're giving away your data, and what you're getting in return is just like pieces of entertainment and like dopamine fixes. And it's not necessarily healthy, and it's been proven, which we'll get into as well, on the mental side. These things are these things are kind of debilitating, and you feel as though you always need to be connected. So with that in mind, you wanted to start us off with.
Well, yeah, because like you think of like Facebook and Instagram, you're like, oh man, they're free apps, right? Like, where's
Hmm.
the downside? But they're free financially.
Hmm.
They're sort of like an attention transaction. You're paying for the service with your attention, right?
Right.
Every person has like a limit on their attention. You can view it as like a resource, right?
Hmm.
So with when there's so much information, you can only really the limiting factor is your attention. You can only consume so much. And all these apps and companies know this, so they're all like competing for your
Yeah.
attention.
Right. It's something that we don't think about ever. It's something that's really interesting to me. And when you started talking to me about this, and you were the one who kind of got me into this whole idea of an economy of attention, is I started looking at like, how much attention span do we have nowadays? Like, what is it at? And there was a Microsoft story, or it was either Google or Microsoft, I forget, but one of the two published research saying that the average attention span of somebody online is 6 seconds. 6 seconds. They said that because that's how long it takes for, on average, for you to click away from whatever you're looking at. It clicks to something else, go to a new tab, go to a new page, maybe click on an ad. Like, 6 seconds is our attention span, and that was kind of like crazy to me. I didn't really fall. I don't think that's true. I mean, it's easy for us to get distracted, but there was
Hmm.
other studies that were saying more along the lines of 15 minutes. And if you ever go to watch a TED talk, TED talks are exclusively under 20 minutes. I've been told. I haven't seen all of them. Maybe more, some go over, but 20 minutes, they don't want it to be any longer because they believe that the attention span right now of human beings is 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so like this kind of thing where either there's an attention deficit where we're slowly losing our attention span over our history, or people can give attention to things, but they choose not to because there's so many other options. What do you think?
Yeah, like there's so many distractions too, right? You just like mentioning just switching through tabs or switching through websites, right? Like
Hmm.
there's just you just boom 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 and then you have your phone there, you're like this and that. And between this like 6 seconds and 15 minutes is quite the kind of the gap.
Hmm.
And as outrageous as 6 seconds sounds, I'm more inclined to
Believe
lean
that.
towards the 6 seconds
Oof.
only because of like if you have ever tried like sort of just closing your eyes and not thinking of anything and just kind of focusing on your breath, it's within 10 seconds a new thought will instantly pop into your mind. Like, oh, this person said this to me today, and you'll start overanalyzing everything you said, and or
Right.
this guy said this, and like within 10 seconds. So that's why it makes me believe more in the 6 second than the like it's hard to differentiate, right? Because
Yeah.
like you can sit
Maybe.
there and watch a TED talk for 15 minutes. It seems like it's sort of almost a different type of attention.
Yeah. Maybe attention span is not the correct word, but
Hmm.
maybe it's like your willingness to succumb to a distraction. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then your attention span is something else. Um, because like we're all able to have like hour to 2 hour to 3 hour long attention spans if we really choose to, if we're really invested in something. Like
Yeah.
we can sit and watch a movie for 3 hours and just be totally zoned in on it if we truly want to be. But then you have to understand, like, imagine you're watching a movie and you're not at the theater, you're in your house. Well, how often are you checking your phone, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah, totally.
and it's like the distraction is, and we keep bringing up this distraction, I think, because most of the times when you're looking at your phone, you're looking at a piece of social media or you're reading a news or something like that. Like this is the attention culture. They're trying to grab you, and they're trying to do it so that they can advertise to you, right? Which is, I think, is what we also want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that social media app on your phone is competing against that movie you're watching, right? They're like they want you to look over at your phone. They don't want you to watch that movie.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think like that too. Like
Hmm.
and it makes me wonder. Like I wish I knew more like the lengths of movies in more of like an earlier era.
To do like a time comparison, yeah, that would be
Yeah,
interesting.
because I know a lot of people were not too thrilled about the runtime of Irishman.
Yeah.
Because just because like
It's
a
what,
lot of
three
people
hours
couldn't sit there for 3.5 hours and watch a movie, right?
hmm
That's tough.
But then you compare it to like the biggest box office hits recently, which were the Infinity Wars and the Endgame movies, and those were also pretty long in length, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So, I mean, to each their own, but I understand what you mean, and I think if you look at some of the older movies, they're a lot longer and they're slower too, but that's a whole
Hmm.
different conversation. I think.
And it kind of reminds me of uh, within amusing ourselves to death. The quote I mentioned earlier was in that book. He talks about our attention spans of humans in around the 19th century,
Okay.
and he was comparing it of like almost of how much longer they were back then before kind of the introduction of TV and images and such, that with a Lincoln he would have these debates with I think a man named Douglas, and they were even before he was running for Senate or running for president or whatever. It was almost like your local political talk or whatever. They would last for like 5 to 7 hours.
Wow.
People would show up and sit and literally only listen to these guys speak pretty complex things. You can actually read some of their talks, and it would just sit and listen to them for like 5 to 7 hours, and they viewed it as kind of their political education, and they viewed it as almost necessary to sort of know what was going on. And I'm just comparing that to these days with like I couldn't imagine sitting and listening to only auditory for like 5 to 7 hours with no images. Like I'm sure there's breaks and such, but even with breaks, like man, you I feel like you'd be pretty bored.
Yeah.
I just wonder if sort of all these distractions and all this constant entertainment is shortening our attention spans.
Right. As much as I'd love to say yes or no to that, I can't be without like
Yeah.
some piece of evidence, and I didn't find anything in relation to that. But it's certainly something to keep in mind as we go forward, because not only does it seem like our attention span is shortening, it's that these companies that are trying to grasp our attention want it to be shorter. They want to shrink our attention span, or make our ability to succumb to distraction easier. Do you know what I mean? They
Hmm.
It seems like that's one of their goals, either consciously or subconsciously, by these companies. So yeah, that's interesting. And the fact that people would go and sit to listen to Lincoln for 7 hours. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
Lincoln was an interesting speaker, but that's a bit much. Damn.
Yeah, totally. So then I feel like one of the ways that these companies are kind of addicting us and the consumer is sort of the way the platforms are set up. Since they're like like they're free and so easy to access,
Yeah.
they they set up they set it up so you have like this infinite scroll. So on like let's say Facebook and Instagram,
Hmm.
they have the your news feed or your feed or whatever, and it's just all these images, all these posts, right? And there's this variable reward, and this variable reward was brought upon uh way back with Skinner's bird experiment. So he was like with behaviorism and such. He had this bird in a cage,
Okay.
and whenever the bird would peck, he would give it food and like a lever or whatever. And so the bird started pecking like whenever it was hungry, it would peck when it would get food. And Skinner sort of ran out of food, so the bird would peck, and he would not give it food. And the bird persisted like with these, but eventually he would give him food every once in a while. So with this variable sort of reward, the bird was didn't know when the next reward was coming. So
Okay.
the bird would peck more often. So this kind of
Compared
is the
to when
same.
it was like a scheduled thing, right?
Exactly.
Right. So like the bird would expect to get their food around this time of the day, so they'd peck more at this time of the
Yeah.
day. But with the other
Eh,
version, he
When
would
it
just
didn't
peck
know.
constantly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And it's the same with these social media platforms is you're scrolling through your feed, you're through your posts, and you're looking, you're like, oh, there's a good post or whatever, and you're like, oh man, that's like kind of the reward, right? And then you scroll and scroll and you see some stuff you don't really care for, and then boom, another one. And it's like these rewards, when you don't, they're unpredictable. It makes you keep coming back, so you can keep scrolling and scrolling. It's like a slot machine, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't know when the next win is, and you're just going to keep spending money, you're going to keep pulling the slots. And
Right.
that sort of spending money on the slots is you sort of using your attention
Mm-hmm.
to keep scrolling
Yeah. And then if you
because
if you jump over to the slot machine beside you because you got a loser here, well, that's going from Instagram to Facebook kind of thing,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
and and since you're like spending your attention on these sort of social media things, right, it's kind of taking away from of other parts of life that might bring more happiness or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because
So yeah, there's the trade-off there that people don't think about, and I certainly didn't think about it until this conversation or before or when I was doing my research. But yeah, it's like you're doing this, and you're pecking, looking at social media, getting this kind of reward, but then you're not thinking like, what else could I be doing right now,
hmm
right? You're not thinking like, okay, as much as I kind of enjoy this, I'm like really not gaining anything of substance. So
yeah.
like, yeah, for sure.
So like let's say like in an ideal world or whatever, you're oh, I'm gonna use this time wisely. So I think from what I looked up, the average user uses about I think just over 2 hours of social media per day.
Wow. Yeah.
I you could if you could you're like, okay, I'm just gonna cut social media, which is unlikely because it's sort of to keep like with everyone sort of uses it to keep up and with your friends and yada yada. That's
Hmm.
sort of what makes it so difficult, right? And so addicting.
Hmm.
Um, or oh, I'm going to use this 2 hours every day to do something else, right? Like maybe I'll read, maybe I'll learn a new skill, maybe I'll learn a language,
Right.
and
I think it
that
doesn't
really
even.
adds up.
Yeah, I don't think it even has to be something that's like productive, because I think when people are on social media, it's like to unwind.
Hmm.
It's like an unwinding thing.
That's no, that's a good point. It's kind of treated as an escape a lot of the times too, right?
Right. So like, let's say you take those 2 hours, and instead of being on social media, you do like a meditation, or you do like yoga, or you just like maybe you play a game. It doesn't matter. But like
Hmm.
the act of you spending unwinding time doing something that's a little bit more positive for you, and we keep kind of like talking in a negative connotation about being on social media, and
Yeah.
I think that kind of brings, I kind of want to talk about the mental health effects of being on it, on the
Hmm.
platform. So like, we through my research, I found like being on social media essentially causes a lot of it, it, it there's been a lot of studies, and a lot of the studies vary. But if you, I looked at a big review article, and it covered almost like 20 or so different reviews, different
Hmm.
research articles, and they were mainly saying people's mental health decreases over time with the use of social media, and it has to do with a lot of factors. Essentially, there's like an addictiveness that we were talking about, where like you're literally addicted to social media, which is a derogatory thing almost always. It's like too much of anything is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the idea of um, being like the comparison mental health aspect, where if you're constantly comparing other people's highlights to your normal life, it'll always, there's always going to be a derogatory effect on your mental state. Like, why am
Yeah.
I not able to do that thing and do this thing?
It's
Yeah.
extremely magnified with social media.
Hmm.
Like you see these people, you're comparing yourself to other people who are extremely like selective in what they're posting, right?
Hmm. And then there was also like a good amount of anxiety from social media. Um, and there's also, it's interesting, like reading about this stuff, because as much as these things, people can like tell you like, I don't like being on social media, I really don't want to watch other people succeed while I'm doing mediocre. Like, they're
Hmm.
still drawn to it, and they're drawn to it, they're addicted. But a big part of this addiction thing nowadays is this ephemeral content, which is essentially a content that comes up onto social media and then goes away. So it's stuff that's there and then gone, and that's prevalent with like Snapchat stories, and Instagram stories is a really big one. And then
Hmm.
also with Twitter, I would argue a lot of the content is ephemeral content, because it's like trending, or it's like really big for a certain amount of time, but then there's always another thing, right? So like, if you're not constantly tuned in, you miss it, and that missing it is FOMO, and FOMO is like a very big part of like our social mentality and why we want to do things on the networks. If I'm missing out, then I'm not connected. And the whole point of the social media is to be connected. So I'm not doing this properly. It's kind of the mental state, right?
Yeah, and you just keep checking back, right?
Yeah, it's really bad for some people's mental health. There has been studies that say people who use social media to stay connected to a community have a increase in mental health. So like there are other studies that you can find, and I saw some as well that were saying like the mental health of certain individuals did go up, and like
Hmm.
their social connections went up, and they made new friends and stuff like that. So there are like you can use social media for good. Um,
Yeah, totally.
and you kind of have to, but when you're doing that, you're targeting what you're doing. You're like, okay, I'm going onto this social media to go onto this page to talk to these people, to learn about this thing, or to discuss this thing, right? So that is just like not what we use it, like at
Yeah,
least
you're using it with intent.
right. Using it with intent is it's really powerful, but when you use it mundanely, kind of just as a pastime and a relaxer or whatever at the end of your day, then
Hmm.
that's when it kind of will take a toll on you mentally. So
Yeah, and that first point you made, it kind of makes me think of sort of like fast food, where it's like the instant gratification sort of like trumps it all.
yeah,
Like you know like it's not really good for you, and you know it's gonna like make you like feel like shit afterwards, but like it's still like it's so good, right? You're like, oh man, I'm just gonna eat it, right? Like the unhealthy food.
yeah,
And like there's it's not all bad, right? Like if you use it in moderation and kind of eat it every once in a while, is kind of it's not a big deal, right?
hmm,
But it's if you're like eating the fast food like every single day and you're sort of addicted to it, that's when it's like the big problem, right? It has like obesity and
hmm,
on your health and such, right?
yeah,
Whereas social media is sort of the same way. Like if it's used in moderation, used with intent, it can be great.
hmm,
But once you start using it way too much and you get addicted, and that's when all this affects your mental health and your social skills and
yeah. I personally, this is a bit of a tangent, but I personally believe that Facebook was ruined when they added the share feature. So if you don't know, I mean you probably know if you're listening to this, but if you don't know, the share feature on social media or on Facebook is if I see a post from one of my friends and I think it's really cool, I can hit share. And what that does is that takes my post and puts it on on my page that all of my friends can see. So before, when I was using Facebook growing up, it was I had my friends and I could only see what they were posting. Maybe it was a photo, maybe it was just a thought, they would just write something out, and that's all I could see. But nowadays, I go onto my Facebook and I don't see anything from my friends. All I see is what they've shared. So, or content that's directed at me that has nothing to do with my friends. But um, what they shared is just like it's something that kind of went viral. They thought was funny or appealing or would stick with me or whatever. So they hit share and they sent it to all their friends. So now
yeah.
instead of ever seeing actually what my friends are doing, I only ever see stuff that is been liked and shared millions of times. And this is again just a tangent, but it's annoying to me because when Facebook first started, it was so much fun. It was like
Yeah.
I could just put up a random, oh, I just watched this movie, it stunk, don't see it, and then someone will comment, hey, that was a great movie, screw you, right? Like, and
Yeah.
it was just like a way to stay connected with your friends and kind of just have like mundane conversations
Yeah.
over or whatever, or just post a photo and be like, hey, I went here, and then people would be like, nice photo,
It's
whatever, right?
it's that sea of irrelevance again.
Yeah,
There's just so much constantly there. Like you have to really scroll through to find what you're looking for, right?
yeah,
You're like, oh, I don't want to watch this cat video. Oh, this is another random video. Oh, finally, one of my friends said something. And
mm-hmm,
again, that's sort of what they want, though. They want that variable reward. They don't want you to. be like, oh, there's what my friend said, there's what my friend said, oh, that's all today, okay, I'll close it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's sort of how I've set up my Instagram. In I only have my friends and like close people I sort of know or have known or whatever. So when I open up Instagram, there's like maybe two or three stories and maybe like one or new posts sort of a day. And that's it. I spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes going through this and that, and I'm like,
Right.
okay, that's all my friends, and I close the app.
Yeah.
But that's not how they want the average person, right? They want the average person to have all the celebrities liked and all these different types of media pages. So they have
Hmm.
to really scroll through the stuff they want to see.
Hmm. Yeah. That's I think that's gonna kind of lead me into the next topic, which is advertising. So like, why is social media designed the way that we just described? And it's to advertise to you, right? And
Hmm.
they make their money by ad. So this is something I didn't know, that I was like, my mind was blown learning about this. When you're scrolling through your social media, let's say it's Facebook, and you see ads on the side, maybe you have an ad blocker, but if you don't, you'd see ads on the side. And most of the time, they're more targeted towards what you're doing. What Facebook does there is they get other companies who want to advertise, and the advertiser will say, hey, I want to advertise to somebody who's interested in soccer, like maybe I'm a soccer goods store, interested in soccer, male, ages 12 to 16. That's my target audience. And Facebook says, no problem. You pay us a fee. We'll put your ads up targeted to those individuals. Okay, great. So Facebook tells us then in their press releases and in their different records, they say there's no exchange of data. So like Facebook has a lot of data on you. There's no exchange of data between the people who are trying to sell you goods and us. They just ask for a specific target audience, and then they pay a fee and we give them ads for that target audience. That all seems to be, that makes sense. The problem is though, is that when when I go to click to buy some shin pads for soccer and I get taken directly to that website, well now that website knows where I came from and has my data. So this was the interesting thing I had to wrap my mind around. Facebook is telling us there's no exchange of data. But as soon as I click that ad, my data goes to that website and now they have my data.
Hmm.
So so taking a step back and just try to understand that like your data is just like information that they have about you, and we'll go into more detail about that. But right now, essentially, what I'm saying to you is when you're getting advertised to, these people are they already know a lot about you, so they know how to they know how to target specific ads at you, and B, every time you're clicking on an ad, your data is getting given to a
So
new
like yeah,
so
like where you are, what you
mhm.
like it's when like it's crazy how much they know about you. Like you could make arguments that they almost know more about you than you know yourself.
Yeah,
And they have these like crazy predictions of what kind of products you want to buy and such. So like these advertisements are so pinpoint, almost accurate. A lot of times you almost think that they're listening to you.
yeah. I mean, I think that was proven to be false, that they're not listening to you. But yeah, it's like, for example, if I go and I search up a mattress company and I want to buy a mattress, I go back to my social media and within seconds I have mattress ads.
Hmm.
So how this works is there's specific companies that are called not data miners but data brokers. They're called data brokers. So there's specific companies called data brokers, and I was reading a Forbes article, and this guy essentially tried to figure out which of the data brokers had his data, and he was asking them, hey, how do you work? Like, what's going on? Like, can I see some of my data that you have on me? So, firstly, they didn't have to give him his data, which was really interesting to me. You as an individual have no right to your own data from these companies. So if I ever wanted to know, like, hey, what's the information that you know about me, they could be like, we don't have to tell you that.
That's wild.
Yeah. So that was the first thing that blew my mind. The other thing was when he talked to some of these companies, they did give him his data back, but it all was incorrect. And it was very specifically incorrect. So it'd be like lives with a spouse, and then he was like, I don't live with a spouse. Has a dog. I don't have a dog. Like lives in this specific county of this specific state. Okay, yeah, that's true. I do live in this specific county of this specific state. Lives in an apartment. He's like, no, I live in a house. Like stuff that kind of you wouldn't expect them to know, right? Like maybe they would know your interests, and that makes sense. Like, oh, I'm constantly going to this forum, or I'm constantly searching for this thing. Like maybe they'd know
Hmm.
your interest, but not like your age, your height, your weight, your living conditions, like who you're living with, like what place of that. But these are things that they're trying to grab data on you, and they have. If you were to be given your data, they would have these things, or at least what they think they are correct about you.
Hmm.
So, like, how much data they're actually collecting is insane. That being said, some of it could be inaccurate, right?
Yeah.
Or the company, when he asks for his data, could just be sending them a shuffled deck of stuff just to keep him off the trail, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and like sometimes all this data may be good, right? Like for like developing more like the better healthcare or whatever, right? Having more info on people's health and
Hmm.
such. But at the same time, knowing like all your weight and even like crazy things like that, you're like, well, how do they know that, right?
Hmm.
That they can like manipulate people, right? And you saw this a lot in the 2016 election with Trump on Facebook. Is this company Cambridge Analytica
Hmm.
um, had all this information and knew which people to target that were sort of the swing vote, the people they could get, the people that were kind of on the fence. And those were the people that they would hit with these very, very targeted ads that would play on fear,
Hmm.
that would and when they would see that on Facebook, they'd be, oh man, like I gotta like do something about this, right? I gotta vote, right?
Hmm.
Even though the ads were very like very wrong, very
Misingenuous, yeah.
misingenuous, yeah. And with Facebook, they were gone, right? There's no way of sort of tracking it. And also it's sort of do with kind of the spending of campaign as well, right? There's with Britain and with like Canada, us, there's I'm not too sure about the states, but there's a budget on how much you can spend, right?
Right.
With there's
For political spending is what you mean.
yes.
Yeah, in a campaign. Yeah. Okay.
So when it comes to the internet and these Facebook advertisements, there's no way of tracking how much money is being spent.
Yeah.
They could just be blowing tons of money on all these advertisements to like billions of people, like, well, obviously not billions in the country, but to the millions of people that are on the Facebook in the country.
Hmm.
And that's kind of giving them a huge advantage to like say a party that's not.
Right. Yeah, I also read a little bit about the Cambridge Analytica story, and something that was funny was when people went. So the company provided the data to individuals if you just went to this website called aboutthedata.com, and it said that 37% of people who went there actually edited the data to be more correct, and 6% and only 6% requested for their information um, not to be used. So 37 were like, hey, uh, here's how you
Like if you're gonna
target me
steal
better.
my data, get it right.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. So yeah, so this data stuff, it blows my mind. Here's an example, um, to kind of help you understand. So Walgreens, which is like a pharmaceutical company, if you don't know, offers a useful comparison to Facebook. So while most Americans believe that their drug prescriptions are protected from any form of exploitation under medical privacy laws, it turns out that those laws permit pharmacies like Walgreens to monetize their users through advertising. Specifically, pharmaceutical companies can pay Walgreens to advertise a drug trial to its customers that suffer from a particular medical condition. So let's say you have diabetes, and a company makes a diabetes medication. Well, then they can ask Walgreens, "Hey,
But
who
who
are
are
you
the diabetes?
who are you giving diabetes medication to? We'd like to give them this pamphlet." So the pharmaceutical company itself never gives a list of patients, so there's no data handoff. It merely hands over the ads to Walgreens and pays a fee, and then Walgreens sends its mailers to all those people that have diabetes, right? So
Hmm.
that's what's happening with Facebook. But in the different being that instead of in Facebook where you click the ad that you're receiving and then all the data is given to that company, and it's interesting because what that company can do once you click that ad, okay, they know who they targeted the ad for, so they know who you are most likely. They can send you directly to a page that is more targeted to you.
Hmm.
So like let's say you click on an ad for shin pads, well it's going to shoot you right to like if you're age 12 to 16, it's going to shoot you right to the young adult shin pads and you're going to get a perfect match. So that kind of thing. It's interesting. Using the information it knows that it gave to Facebook and now is taking in from you. And then when you get to the website, you might see something on the bottom of the screen that has something to do with cookies or please accept this and don't worry about it. And then you hit that, now it has more information on you. Like it's able to access
And
what you've been on recently.
it sounds very invasive, right? You sort of have this trust in say Walgreens that you're like, oh, like they're just giving your information for free, right?
Yeah.
Which you I feel like these companies would make the argument that this is benefiting you, right? It's like the convenience, it's making your life easier.
Hmm.
These diabetics are just getting these kind of free pamphlets sent to them without having to do the work or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But it's sort of taking the agency away from the consumer, right? Like it's thrusting it upon them rather than them sort of choosing that way, right?
yeah, it's true. I agree with that. And when we first started talking about this, I was kind of more lenient. I was kind of more like, well, I like my targeted ads. I don't have to deal with random BS that I don't want to see on my screen. Like I'd rather,
Hmm.
as much as I don't, maybe I do, or maybe I don't want to buy it. Um, it's still better for me to look at the things I was just looking up. Like it's still more interesting. Anyways, the ad targeting is more interesting. And then maybe there's an ad that I actually do want to buy because I was intrigued in something, and then I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. That's exactly what I was searching for. The ad nailed it. I want to buy that thing. But after
Hmm.
going through this and kind of understanding how it works, and all these companies that are data harvesting and selling it back and forth to try to get more information on you, it's kind of scary how specific the data can be. And
Yeah, and how much they're like profiting from it. It
yeah.
makes me wonder if there's going to be a huge, even a larger like inequality down the line because they're like a huge, like not just on the technical level but also on like the wealth level, like um so like on the individual level and the society level, like the people that are in the innovation are kind of the haves and the people that are just in the regular workplace are sort of the have nots.
Hmm.
And with 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 all this data they're collecting, like you can it's going to be towards creating this like training AI and such is one of the possibilities. So with this AI, a lot of low skilled jobs are sort of being phased out, and you see this with Amazon, right? There's malls are almost dying, and all these clerical jobs and service jobs are leaving.
Right.
But then on like a global level, like the US and China are probably leading the charge in sort of training this AI because they have so much people and to
Money.
collect all the
Yeah.
information from, right? And the money, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be like this big global divide too on who invents, produces, and distributes versus the rest. So it's like the wealth is going to be distributed way, way more in sort of the US and China who are collecting all this data. And the average person is, it's almost like going back to FOMO. They're going to be like missing out, right? They're like, oh man, I had just this regular job that's phased out, and now I'm just collecting scraps, which is going to probably be UBI, and they're kind of missing out on this future, right?
Hmm. So, just to like help me understand what you mean by this. So this, so how are they going from collecting data to like making money and holding power? So like you're saying we're going to be missing out on it. So I think I'm missing a step when you explain this. So we're collecting data.
Yeah, so when you collect the data, then you can train these AIs and create these AIs with all this data.
To just like take over in the workforce.
Yeah, so like you're getting smarter and smarter. It's like machine learning, right? And they're sort of like almost getting to the point where they're almost going to be training themselves, right?
Mm,
And that, so the companies there, the ones that are having all this AI, are going to be the ones that are selling it to else selling it, so they're going to be making loads of money from that. And then when the companies are using it, everything's going to be a lot cheaper to make,
right.
so it phases out all the jobs, so people are going to be almost workless, and all the stuff's going to be super cheap, right?
Yeah. Gotcha.
So these big companies are the ones getting all the wealth,
Hmm.
even more than it's I mean, I'm just speculating here. It's not like it's all happening real time, right?
Hmm.
This is just from stuff I've read about.
Yeah.
And one of the examples that kind of is kind of spooky towards this stuff is, it was a quote from Yuval, I think Harari, and so he mentions like Amazon Kindle. So this is going back to like the data and sort of manipulation. And so he says devices such as Amazon's Kindle are able to constantly collect data on their users while they're reading books. Your Kindle can monitor which parts of the book you read quickly and which slowly, on which page you took a break, and on which sentence you abandoned the book to never pick it up again. If Kindle was to be upgraded with a face recognition software and a biometrics sensor, it would know how each sentence influenced your heart rate, your blood pressure, and it would know what made you laugh, what made you sad, what made you angry. Soon books will read you while you are reading them. And whereas you quickly forget most of what you read, computer programs need never forget. Such data should eventually enable Amazon to choose books for you with uncanny precision. It will also allow Amazon to know exactly who you are and how to press your emotional buttons.
Yeah. That's scary, right?
Yeah,
Oh, and
and you might think, oh, like we'll never let Kindle have face recognition or biometric sensors. Like they could probably add those in, and you wouldn't even know any better.
yeah, that is the scary part of it, right? Is what
Hmm.
is regulating this? What is stopping this right now? There's almost nothing. Um, I did see some. I did try to look up some regulations. Maybe we'll get to that later. But it's it's interesting to think how can this stuff be stopped? Like, what kind of laws could I put in place? Could be put in place that the companies would ever have to admit to, right?
Yeah, they have such like a monopoly on all this.
Hmm.
Like only, I think it's even only four countries now. Only four countries have a GDP greater than the combined market capitalization of Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. So if you add up all their market capitalization,
Hmm.
it's like up to like 4 trillion.
Yeah,
I
they're
think the only countries bigger compared to four companies are bigger than the whole world besides four countries. It's like Germany, Japan, US, or China and US.
Yeah,
Like
that's insane.
that's
So yeah, it's like, well, the
and then
country
yeah,
wants
sorry.
to regulate. Let's say, okay, you can't put these biometric scanners in your Kobo in your reader, and they say, well, okay, we're just not going to ship any products to your country now, and then
Yes.
that whole country's like screwed, right? Like,
Hmm.
and there'd be a revolt to be like, well, what do you mean we can't ship our goods via Amazon anymore? What do you mean Amazon doesn't come to Germany? The government would be overthrown in a second, right? Like, or there would be
Yeah.
mass protests or something like that, right? Like it would be
Hmm.
outrageous. So the company will win in this regard, and then continue to collect data on you. Like this is all very dystopian, and I don't like where it's going at all.
Yeah. Like as much as we can just sit here and blame the big companies, there's also a lot of blame on the consumer and on us as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not just only them. They're sort of to blame as in making it sort of addictive and super convenient,
Hmm.
but it's also on a lot of onus on us to sort of be informed about this stuff, right? So this is sort of why I kind of wanted to have this conversation in the first place. Because I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, right? And being like, "Oh, these technologies are evil, never use them," as I have Facebook and Instagram on my phone, right?
Yeah.
But it's sort of just becoming aware of what they're doing
Hmm.
so you don't fall victim to them.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Um, so from here, did you want to start talking about like maybe what are some solutions to this? Like what can we kind of do to get away and just understand like the risk that we face and essentially like how our data is being collected and how social media is affecting us.
Yeah, totally. um One of the big ones that I've always, like, I don't know, I feel like this is almost a solution to everything. It's just the idea of knowing yourself better. It's like if you know yourself better, then you kind of know, you'll see what these companies are kind of doing, right? If they know you better than you know yourself, they're going to manipulate you. But if you know yourself really well, you're going to see them trying to manipulate you.
Right.
You're going to notice them, you're going to be aware of them. You can build a defense for it. And now these this yeah, so this isn't like as actionable as like maybe like making it harder to access your social media, but I think it's just a super important kind of skill you should sort of
Learn, yeah.
focus on. Yeah, like mindfulness and
Hmm. Is the solution for us to just delete all these social medias and ask
oh,
all of our data to be given back? And is that the solution?
it's that's a tough question, right? Because it's so much more difficult to conceptualize like a data or your information kind of ownership,
Hmm.
because you can easily conceptualize like land ownership, right? Like, you can build a fence around it, you kind of know where your property line is,
Hmm.
but conceptualizing that in terms of your own information and data is much harder.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say, like, when we first started talking about this, I was kind of under the opinion that the other companies that are collecting the data, they have a right to that data because they're doing the collecting, and they're able to hold on to it, and they have networks set up to store the data, right? Whereas
Mhm.
we, as much as we are just creating data via clicks on the internet, they're actually spending time, energy, and money in storing it. So it's almost like it's their information, just it's about you. So
Yeah, except for like it that would be all good and well if it was used for good, but there's lots of companies that use it in the negative sense just for their bottom lines to make more money, right?
yeah.
So it's hard because it's you want it to all be used for good because there's some amazing potential. Like
Yeah.
you could have like a chip inside of you that could is essentially a doctor at 24/7, right? Anytime anything wrong inside you, you get boom, it could tell you.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh man, you're in trouble, you should see a real doctor or you should get this operation, or like maybe cancer is like onsetting right away. Like that'd be crazy. But at the same time, companies could use this data. They might be able to even know like what your DNA is and use it in a more negative sense, right? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
so I don't think just deleting everything is sort of the solution, but I don't know. It's hard to think of what the real like a solution is. Like, I don't think it's realistic just to get everyone to delete it, right?
Yeah, it's almost impossible, and we talk about it. We talked about addiction, and I think that's
Yeah.
a big part of it. But also, connectivity is something that we crave. Like we crave social interaction, face to face and online. Now we crave it. So like, removing that would be really tough. And people just have like always had this, and people are growing up now where it's never not been a part of their lives.
Oh yeah.
So that's a
What
really interesting
using like social media and the internet and stuff is a very individualistic uh
thing to do. Yeah.
thing to do.
Hmm.
So it's not like you're in face-to-face social interaction. A lot of it's like online interaction.
Right. Okay.
I feel like that's just a sort of a different
It.
experience, but
Okay. I see what you're saying. So you're saying like, as much as it is to stay connected, it's a very solo thing to log on to
yeah,
Facebook and scroll through.
like you're like, oh, I'm kind of tired. Like, I can just instant message, or I can just have a FaceTime chat with somebody instead of like going out to getting a drink or going out for dinner or something. Like, you're almost less likely to go out and experience social interaction sometimes because it's almost easy and convenient just to do it with their better communication
I
set up through
yeah.
like social media and such.
I would say it's. I would say I would put a counterpoint to that, that if you're on social media, it's easier for you to arrange these meetings with people, and maybe easier for you to stay connected with people you might not be able to stay connected with, like people who have
Hmm.
fallen out of your life. You'd still be able to talk to and maybe see on the occasion because of social media.
Yeah, totally. There's that aspect too. Like, especially if someone moved overseas or something.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here I had another question. Would a subscription-based social media platform be a solution? So essentially, we Netflix is really big right now. A bunch of other subscription based sort of things where you pay a monthly $7, $10, $12, whatever, and then you get on and you get access to a social media platform where there's no ads, so there's no data collection,
Yeah.
and all you're seeing is content from your friends. Would that be a solution? And
I think so. I think it's sort of the beginning for if companies that's sort of changing their business model, right?
mhm,
It's changing it away from addiction, which it would totally solve. Well, it wouldn't solve everything, but I think that would be
it
a
would be
big change.
yeah.
I personally would pay for some sort of subscription. Like, say Google, like I use Google enough that say it started charging $10 a month or something,
Hmm.
and they took away all this kind of data and all this sort of like issues. I would totally pay. I would totally get my money's worth.
Right. Because that's the thing about Google right now is that you go and you search anything, it's all for free. That they're giving you this amazing platform to pretty much
Yeah.
be. And I mean, you can use Bing for the same thing, but I mean, who uses Bing? But
Yeah.
there's platforms that just let you have access to anything on the internet, and the internet is so vast.
Hmm.
So what are they getting in return? They're getting your data, right? So every time you search something, that is traced by Google, and then Google can sell ads similar to how we describe Facebook doing it. But so like if what you're saying is okay, Google now you have to pay $10 and they don't take your ad revenue. And you right away you said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Would that
Yeah.
fly in the general public though? Just because we've had
I'm.
Google free
It's
for so long.
well, yeah. Like, it's hard to say for what other people
Think.
would think, right? So I think if you look at the Facebook's market capitalization compared to like how many users it has daily or total, it's like if I think they have like over 2 billion or something
Yeah, I
users.
found 1.73 billion active users daily.
that's daily. That's not even like how many accounts they have. That's
I know, daily. Okay.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
So like I think I heard someone mention they sort of get almost like $25 per user out of person just based off their market capitalizations to like user numbers.
Yeah. So
So
$25 times.
they're like so you're like, oh man, it's free for me, and but the company's making $25 per person. Like it seems like there's
Something
I don't
wrong.
know, like yeah, like sure, like it's a free product, but I don't know. I don't know. Like
I
it
mean,
makes sense they're making money, but I don't know.
and
Like
then I feel when I'm on these social media platforms nowadays, I feel like, oh, well, you get what you pay for, because you're burdened with ads. You're burdened with
yeah,
ads, and you're burdened with things that are catered to you, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, here they go again. Um,
yeah, like Spotify, like you pay $10 a month or whatever, so you you get to choose what music you listen to. It's not always on shuffle, and you avoid all those ads.
yeah.
Like I would never be able to go back to pleb Spotify. So I don't I personally think it's sort of a solution
Mhm.
because like just to reiterate, it sort of pulls away from the addiction model
Right. I
and
don't.
the data
Yeah.
collection model.
It wouldn't help. I don't think it would help with the mental health issues, but uh, I guess it's better
Hmm.
than what we currently have, right? Because like I
Yeah,
said earlier, the social media mental health effect is based on perception of other people, and so on and so forth, right? So
yeah. I don't think. Well, I think that's almost like a you almost have to solve it a different way. I don't know. Like I don't know how to solve that issue in terms of because I don't think social media is going anywhere. So is there a way of making it almost always be a benefit to mental health?
no, yeah, it's so hard. I do
It's
think though it might help if, like I said, with the share feature, if you're just seeing your friends or interacting with your friends rather than interacting with strangers who've been liked and shared a million times,
yeah,
that might help.
but you can set it up that way without like that though.
Right. But people are not that active about how they set up their social media, right?
Yeah, because I like
You
time, right? A lot of people say, like, "Oh, I don't have time to set this up. I just want to instantly use it.
Yeah,
I just
this
want
is
to
my time
connect." And
waster, not something that I put time into.
yeah,
Yeah. So, anyways, I think I have one more question for you. Is having a shorter attention span a bad thing? Is it always a bad thing? Or is it a good trait that we're able to jump from one thing to the next quickly? Do you know what I mean? Is it good that we can kind of multitask, even though multitasking is not like a real thing? You Multitasking, from what I learned, is just switching from one task to another
switching.
quickly.
Hmm.
Is it a
Um,
good thing in some regard that we're able to do that?
I don't.
Hmm.
I'm. It's a interesting question, and I don't want to just hum and haw and sort of my gut reaction is leaning towards it's not a good thing
Right.
because it's I don't know I think almost like focusing on certain things and giving attention to one thing at a time
Is it
is
better?
better because like your short-term memory you can only put so much into it. It's like I think I read 120 bits or something, so you can only have a certain amount of things in there, right?
In your
Before it
yeah.
gets moved on to your long term. So if you're bouncing around so much, you're never actually remembering anything.
Right.
So what's the point of taking in all this information and stuff if you're not actually going to remember any of it?
Yeah. The only purpose I could see would be for entertainment value, or and yeah, it's like, why would you want to take in all this information and jump around so quickly if none of it was going to get stored in long-term memory, right?
Hmm.
And that to me is, well, that's entertainment, right? You're just being
Yeah,
entertained for the time being.
or amusing ourselves to death. There's so much I don't know, like with yeah, like I understand like it's for entertainment, but there's so much entertainment out there. Do you really need to be swapping or switching around all the time?
Yeah. I think
Like,
that's a bigger question too, is um, why do we need to be entertained at all points in time?
hmm
And why is it like such a commodity that instead of me sitting in silence or me like pondering a deep question, I'm instead always wanting to be entertained and have the means to do it nowadays. But
yeah, and it's almost like frowned upon to not be, right? Like, I'm bored, like, right? Like,
yeah.
it's almost like I almost see boredom as like almost a good thing, right? And there's a book called Stillness is the Key, I think that's what it's called, and it's kind of like a book on stoicism and stuff, and how just taking a break and stillness is very important in with
Yeah.
all this stuff.
Okay, well, I think we're getting away from our main topic, but
Yeah,
it is really interesting to think about. Did you have anything else to say about
I
this?
can I want to mention more sort of solutions,
Okay, yeah.
and I find it very helpful. Like, so I'm like, okay, like a few days prior to this, I'm like, okay, I want to do like a bit of an experiment. There's on the newest Android app, you can go to your there's a settings called digital well-being,
Oh, yeah.
and you can see how many hours you're using your phone, how many times you're unlocking it, the notifications you're getting. It'll show you how much time you're spending on each of your apps. And I think when you look actually see those in front of your eyes, it can be really eye-opening. It makes me think of those, you know, those cameras you're driving by, like here in Canada, you're driving and on the side of the road it's like a speed sign,
Yeah.
and it'll tell you how fast you're going.
Yeah.
And you're going like most of like for me, it's like, oh, it's 60 and I'm going like 65 or something, and it's flashing its lights and stuff.
Yeah. Hey, slow
And
down.
it's like it's seeing it back at you, and you're like, oh man, others can see it. I like it's out there, right? It's not like you're blind to it anymore. You're like, oh man, I should slow down, right?
Right.
And it's that kind of thing with looking at how much time you're spending on your phone. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna see if I can dial. I was like racking up like 2 hours or whatever on my phone. I'm like, okay, that seems like a ton. Like
Dial
I
this
could be
back. Yeah.
using, yeah. And Reddit was using a lot of that time, like maybe like a half hour to an hour. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna spend the next like just easy 2 to 3 days. I'm not gonna use my phone as much, and I'm gonna try to only use Reddit maybe once to zero times a day. And it was crazy how much I was just drawn to my like being aware of it. I was just constantly drawing myself to the phone, and I'd be like, "Oh no, I can't!" Like I'd
Right.
be like, I'd sit there, I'd open it up, I'd unlock it, and I'm like, oh, I can't. Like I've got to be strong. Like I gotta relax. Like, and just doing it for like 1 or 2 days, you know, right away, you're like, oh my god, I think I'm like addicted.
yeah.
And I always thought of myself as someone that didn't use my phone that much. I've only had a phone for like 4 years, and it's just me always going back to it. Once I was aware of it, it was like, oh my god, like I think I'm addicted. It's kind of spooky, and because you just always it's such so habit. It's
Yeah.
just you want to keep looking, you want to keep doing the same thing you're always doing,
Yeah. And
and
it really draws into question, like what you said before. None of that stuff that you're reading on Reddit or on Facebook is ever getting lodged in your long term memory, right?
no,
So why do it just to be entertained, I guess, for the moment?
yeah, it's that instant gratification again, right?
Yeah. So,
That dopamine hit.
yeah. All right. I
So also,
yeah.
um putting stuff that's keeping stuff away from sort of your home page helps a lot, because as soon as you unlock your phone, if your Instagram is right there, you're gonna be like clicking it almost all the time, right? You're like, oh, I'm gonna check my phone for email or something, and then you unlock it and Instagram's right there, like, let me check Instagram real quick.
Yeah, yeah, I
if
feel
you
yeah, I know what you mean.
if you put these barriers for you to access these apps, you will be less likely to use them. Like if you gotta really dig, you won't just unlock your phone and start infinitely scrolling for an hour. Like if you gotta really dig and then sign into it, you're not gonna be like, oh, let me just check this for a minute. So I think that kind of tactic helps.
Yeah, so like take your home page, remove all the apps from it. Don't uninstall, but like remove them all, and then so every time you
Yeah,
have to go into your phone, you have to like, okay, I gotta go through the app section, and now I gotta search. Right. I
yeah,
understand.
and
I
just
understand.
folders within folders. Yeah, and and then and there's and then there's stuff you can do with color. So like since a lot of these apps are very visually appealing, if you like so for me at like 8 p.m. my phone starts to dim and it goes to like a less kind of appealing color, and
Okay.
then at like midnight when I start to like unwind, it goes grayscale, no color whatsoever.
Okay.
So I kind of know that's time to unwind and stop using my phone,
Right.
and the colors aren't there for me to kind of be distracted to it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I know that I fall prey to that. Like I open my phone, oh, there's Instagram, lock it on. But I never thought about colors.
Hmm.
So you're saying like if I'm to tone down my colors, I'm less likely to want to click on those apps.
Not so much click on them, like maybe like less likely, like if you're scrolling through it and it's all super dull and pale, right? You're like, I'll
Oh,
just
okay.
close it or whatever.
I see. Yeah, that makes
Like
sense.
again, it's not foolproof, but I mean, if you have a whole bunch of these set in place, these little changes can accumulate, right?
Hmm. Did you have
Um,
any other solutions?
I think that's kind of the gist, but yeah. So there's great stuff out there online, and that really helps with kind of being aware to this stuff as well, and resources and solutions. And I was introduced to all this by on well, a podcast I listened to, the Tim Ferriss show. He had a guest on called Tristan Harris, and he has a website called a Humane Tech, and that he goes through kind of just envisioning a world where technology supports our shared well-being, and he goes on about like our attention spans and this and that, and it's a really good site just to become aware and the solutions and stuff.
Right. Okay.
I'll
So
link it in some sort of show notes.
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, I think I think this is pretty much all we had to say about this subject, and it's a heavy one. So hopefully our next one will be a little lighter. But
Mhm.
it is really something to think about in your daily life, and maybe you really don't care about all this stuff. Like maybe it's like, hey, I like my social media. Uh, every day I like to click on it. I like to read through it, and whatever you say doesn't matter. I don't care what ads they take. I don't care the data they collect. Like this can totally be your opinion, and
Mhm.
that's fine because honestly, a lot of people probably share that opinion. They just
Yeah,
don't want to say
totally.
it, right? Like, um,
Yeah, and we don't want to tell other people how to live their life, right? This
yeah,
is sort of just have a conversation about this stuff,
hmm and it
just to have bring some awareness.
yeah, it like the social media you use could make you happy, and that's perfectly fine. So,
Mhm.
with that being said, I know I'm gonna change how I use my stuff. I'm gonna probably really keep a tab on how often I use it. Try to know look at that app I was just in my phone now actually while you're talking about it, looking at my digital well-being app because I just got the upgrade and tracking it as well. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. Do you have anything else to say to close this off?
No, I think I've said everything I've sort of wanted to say.
Awesome.
Just to kind of just reiterate, like we're not like super against technology or anything, but just to have this conversation and to bring some sort of light to some possible problems down the line.
Yeah. All right. Everyone have a great night. Peace.